I'm alive. I shouldn't be.
He should not be alive. This is unfucking believable.
From the heart of trucker America, my boy Reed Coverdale, host of The Naturalist Capitalist.
This is what government does. It sucks.
If you think you're going to win people over by stating commonplaces, you're just selling the other part.
It is about dictating every transaction that you have for the rest of your life.
Mr. Potato Head.
Coverdale is the guy to be president of the United States.
You intimidated me with your perfect 74 stat.
That was the beginning of my problems.
He died doing what he loved, chasing a minor.
Well, I'll put a 50 cal attached to my Suburban.
Libertarians need to get out of New York.
The gulag is going to be in your house.
This guy's a fucking murderer. He deserves to be in a dungeon.
Gotta get him out of that truck at night and get him into the White House.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Naturalist Capitalist. I am doing this one from the cab of my truck in Port Hueneme, California, picking up a bulldozer first thing tomorrow morning and heading back to Utah with it. So hopefully we don't have too many technical difficulties with the streaming. So you all know how it goes from the truck. It's hit or miss. If any of you are new here, please subscribe to the channel. And then in the links in the description, you could follow me on Odyssey, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. I'm also on Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. Make sure you follow me on all those platforms because I'm known to disappear from platforms from time to time. So I'm trying to diversify a little bit more this time because I kind of had all my eggs in one basket last time. Anyway, we got a good show tonight. We have Keith Knight on the other end. How you doing, man?
Doing excellent, Reed. Excellent idea to diversify your social media portfolio, because if you put all your eggs in one basket, it's pretty difficult.
Yes. So this is your first time on the show. You've had me on your show twice, which I thank you for having me on. And could you just give us a little intro, who you are, what you do, and why you got into it? What inspired you to get into this?
I run the Don't Tread on Anyone podcast at the Libertarian Institute with Sheldon Richman, Scott Horton, Kyle Anzalone, Patrick McFarlane, and a number of other libertarian gentlemen. Basically, I am all about changing the way people think about decriminalizing capitalist acts between consenting adults. If I really had to narrow it down, I would say that's probably my biggest issue, for the same reason I believe in freedom for people to choose their religion or freedom of speech. I believe in freedom for commercial interactions. It's not only the most moral thing, but allows the most amount of people to increase their net wealth. So I think it's so vitally important that these kind of ideas more or less defeat the ideas of statism, of coercion. So I started the podcast just so I could stop repeating myself and just link people to things instead of me having to constantly say the same thing again and again. And I had planned on only doing a few episodes. That's why my first episodes don't even have a microphone. I thought I'd be done real quick. And then here I am, probably like 700 videos later. I'm not sure if that YouTube count is correct, but it says 765. So maybe it's accurate. But yeah, my most popular videos are titled Propaganda Analysis, where I'll go through an article and try and decipher it. We also talk about history, politics. I do a lot of interviews. That is more or less how I got here and what the show's about.
Sweet. So tonight we're going to be talking about Yemen. And I don't know enough about Yemen. I certainly know a lot more than the average person, but it's still not enough. So I wanted to have someone on who actually really knows what he's talking about. And I know you did a speech in Phoenix recently, and we'll be kind of touching on that throughout this episode. We'll be looking at your notes that you had from that speech. So I'm just going to give the basic outline of what I understand. So we thought that after the Iraq war, that somehow with a Shiite majority country, even though it was ruled by a Sunni minority, that they wouldn't choose a Shiite government after we overthrew their Sunni government. And then they obviously chose a Shiite government anyway, which basically aligned the country with Iran. And then also Obama got into the Iran deal with Iran. So Saudi Arabia was basically like, what the fuck? You know, you're supposed to be our friends and you're helping the Iranians. And so then they kind of twisted Obama's arm and he said, all right, fine, I'll help you genocide the Houthis in Yemen. And we've basically been helping him ever since, I think that's 2014, correct?
That was in 2015. I will.
Okay.
I'll go over it in detail in my notes. But yeah, I guess the Saudis are just the jealous ex-boyfriend of the Middle East. Who, I mean, you can't even talk to Iran without them getting upset. So yeah, basically the original justification for intervention in Yemen, you can read about in Barack Obama's book, A Promised Land. He says, I thought about what John Brennan and FBI Director Robert Mueller had told me in briefings on the shooting, Fort Hood. Hassan, a U.S.-born Muslim with a troubling record of erratic behavior, appeared to have been radicalized over the internet. In particular, he'd been inspired by and repeatedly sent emails to a charismatic Yemeni American cleric named Anwar al-Awlaki, who had a broad international following and was believed to be the leading figure in al-Qaeda's increasingly active branch in Yemen. He then goes on to say, when it came to repatriation for people in Gitmo, for instance, many low-levels detainees came from countries that didn't have the capacity to safely handle their return. In fact, the largest contingent, 99 men, was from Yemen, a dirt-poor country with a barely functioning government, deep tribal conflicts, and the single most active al-Qaeda chapter outside Pakistan's federally administered tribal areas. So here is Obama's original justification for going into Yemen. We're going into Yemen to fight AQAP, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. This is an organization that is responsible for killing 17 sailors in 2000 on a Yemeni harbor. It's referred to as the USS Cole. Bombing was a suicide attack in the year 2000. So in response to that drone program, you have CIA officer John Kiriakou commenting on this operation. And this is what the CIA said with regard to the drone operation. Well, the truth of the matter is that the drone program is probably the most potent recruiting tool that foreign terrorist groups have. I can tell you that I have interrogated dozens of al-Qaeda fighters in my CIA years, and to a man, they all said that they had no beef with the United States. They had no personal problem with the United States until we rocketed their villages with drones, and we killed their cousin, or their parents, or their brother, or sister, or whatever it was. And they were compelled to take up arms against the United States. So there are people in countries all over the region, not just the Middle East, but South Asia and the Horn of Africa, that otherwise would not have had reason to take up arms against us and did so solely because of the drone program. Final words on the original entrance into Yemen come from the drone papers published by The Intercept. I want to say probably 10 years ago at this point, but referring to the period of 2012-2013. The Intercept reports, during one 5-month period of the operation, according to the documents, nearly 90% of the people killed in airstrikes were not the intended targets. In Yemen and Somalia, where the U.S. had far more limited intelligence capabilities to confirm the people killed are the intended targets, the equivalent ratios may well be much worse. So he's starting a drone program that creates more terrorists and kills civilians. This is this is like the good part of the war. This is their best argument for intervention into Yemen because they have a lot of al-Qaeda. The U.S. declared war on international terrorism, especially al-Qaeda, in 2001. So this is the first section of what we need to understand about the Yemen war.
Gotcha. So what beef do the Saudis have with Yemen? Why do they hate Yemen so much? What is the history behind that?
As far as it being their international or not international, their regional rival, I'm not sure about how far back it goes, but certainly with any country that borders you, you want there to be a friendly government or a puppet government. So in the same way, Putin wants Ukraine to have Yanukovych instead of Zelensky, and the same reason the U.S. wants Zelensky instead of Yanukovych. simply being geographically close to another area, governments have a big interest in installing or supporting or allying with these governments. Now, one important thing about this is that the U.S. couldn't just start waging war in another sovereign country against even insurgents there. So what they did was Barack Obama, going back to the days of Dick Cheney in 2002, George Bush in 2007, had an agreement with the Yemeni government. The guy's name is Saleh. He was president of, I forget the name of northern Yemen, but between 1978 and 1990, he was the president of northern Yemen. This was an Arab republic, and then president of all of Yemen from 1990 until 2012. Now, what happened was there was the Arab Spring in 2011, starting in small places like Tunisia, later going to Egypt and a number of other places in the region. Hadi is facing assassination attempts, and there's two attempts, and he actually gets injured by one of these. So he sort of he more or less exits the throne, and an election is held with a guy named Hadi. Now, Hadi was Saleh's vice president. Hadi wins this election. The reason he does is because if you look at the ballot, there is literally one person on this ballot here. You could find it at npr.org. It's in my notes, but those notes are so cluttered, it's going to be impossible to find. So after holding this election in 2012, Hadi wins this one-man election. Now, what happens after is the U.S. starts working with the Hadi government as well as the Houthis to target al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Just as they were working with the previous government to target al-Qaeda, they're now working with the Houthi regime to more or less to target people in here. Now,
so just to clarify, this is referencing what you just read off your notes. At this time, this is why we're intervening. We're on the side of the Houthis against al-Qaeda at this point, correct?
Correct. Now, when you say at this point, temporarily the U.S. allied with it goes back and forth so much. Temporarily, they allied with the Houthis. Here is the justification for that. I do want to pull up this quote because it's from Lloyd Austin. It was just so telling that this is how they more or less talk about things. Okay, you can more or less get rid of that.
Okay, we don't need this anymore.
I'll just go by my hand.
Okay.
According to the Wall Street Journal, the military had no problem with the Houthis and was instead happy to have motivated enemies of al-Qaeda to work with in Yemen. So now at this point, after Hadi is not able to retain power, Hadi wages war against the Houthis, and the Houthis respond and take over the capital. So now the Houthis are calling the shots in Yemen. The U.S. now is allied with the Houthis. Here's Lloyd Austin, who was commander of Central Command at the time. The Wall Street Journal says, the U.S. has formed ties with Houthi rebels who seize control of Yemen's capital. White House officials and rebel commanders said, in the clearest indication of a shift in the U.S. approach there as it seeks to maintain its fight against a key branch of al-Qaeda. You also have the then Deputy Secretary of Defense of Intelligence, Michael Vickers. He was speaking to the Atlantic Council. He said, senior U.S. intelligence official, I'm sorry, this is from a summary of the Atlantic Council. Official Michael Vickers said January 21st that the United States is continuing attacks on al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, AQAP, despite ongoing violence in the Yemeni capital, Sana'a, and has an intelligence relationship with the Houthi insurgent group that has seized much of the capital since September. Vickers, in response to a question from Al Monitor, stated, the Houthis are anti-al-Qaeda, and we've been able to continue some of our counterterrorism operations against al-Qaeda in the past months. So we have two very reliable sources saying that the U.S. is now working with the Houthis. Then comes 2015. Yes, I guess we can move up to there. Here is the Atlantic. It's important because when you see that this is recorded, on these mainstream outlets that have wide respect. It's just mind-blowing that it still hasn't gotten more attention. So, since 2015, Saudi Arabia has targeted Yemen's Shia Houthi militias and their allies, loyalists of former President Saleh, who 2 years ago seized the Yemeni capital Sana'a by force. Several months later, they drove the Saudi-backed President Hadi into exile when Saudi King Salman announced the intervention in Yemen, an intervention the kingdom has painted as a proxy war with Iran, its regional foe. The White House immediately authorized a support package that included intelligence sharing and logistical support for military operations. That package has seen the United States deliver more than 40 million pounds of fuel to Saudi jets over the past 18 months. According to U.S. Central Command, the Saudis would be crippled without direct U.S. military assistance, particularly aerial refueling, which continues unabated. So we explicitly have not only the U.S. working with the Houthis, them switching sides against the Houthis, now working with the Saudis, because this new prince wanted to do what is commonly referred to as a situation of strength, where a government thinks they can have an easy win and win a lot of approval. This is what Waco was for with the ATF. They thought they could go in, bring all these kids out and say, look at all the kids we saved. So governments are constantly picking on tiny little targets just to show how strong they are, to increase their legitimacy in, sometimes it's also referred to as a show of force. Anything on that before I move on?
Yeah, so the only comment I have is we already had practiced this in 2006 when we had fought Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and then decided in 2006 to basically start supporting them. So I guess we'd already given this a dry run. So I guess we were just trying it again in Yemen.
It's unbelievable. It's like they just never learn. They didn't say, all right, who's been wrong about the Middle Eastern wars? Let's get them out. All right, who was calling this Ukrainian crisis years ago? Well, the CIA director, William Burns, is certainly one of them. But guys like John J. Mearsheimer in 2014 called this entire thing. I shouldn't have gotten into Ukraine. But the point is that they face no incentive, and governments tend to attract the most evil people who didn't even care in the first place. They go, we didn't learn? All right, well, then we just need more funding so we can learn better. It's so vitally important to realize that the state is the health of war, just as war is the health of the state. If there's a group you can't opt out of funding and very often gets to conscript people against their will, there's going to be a lot more war than if you have to voluntarily fund it. There's no moral double standard for the state in the minds of the masses. You're just really asking for this to always continue. So that, I guess, is the heart of the issue. Now, what matters is what motivated the Obama government to see this as something they should get into. Here is an explanation from two former Obama administration officials, Robert Malley and Stephen Pomper. They said, why the U.S. got entangled in this war and why a president so determined to keep the country out of another Mideast military mess nonetheless got caught in this one makes for a painful story. In March 2015, Saudi Arabia came to the U.S. with a request for support in a campaign it vowed to conduct regardless. After that, and although events took place a mere 4 years ago, memories blur. In our conversations, many former U.S. officials found it hard to recall what precisely the Saudis asked for, what specific commitments the administration made in response, and when certain types of assistance started to flow. Some, including one of us who attended the deliberations, recall a deeply ambivalent president who green-lighted U.S. support but insisted to be confined to the defense of Saudi territory and not extended to the war against the Houthis. Others don't recall hearing about that instruction and struggle to reconcile it with what the U.S. actually did during the war, including refueling coalition sorties and replenishing weapons stocks. They go on to say that government has been toppled by an insurgent group, the Houthis, although the extent of its ties to Iran was debatable and debated, their existence was indisputable. That's how you know they're lying when they say we know this for sure, and don't cite any evidence. Arab uprisings, even more so. It's negotiations over a nuclear deal with Tehran. So that is the general justification. You were correct earlier in mentioning the U.S. had a deal with Iran. Saudis didn't like it. That's why the U.S. more or less had to placate Saudi Arabia in backing them in this war. So yeah, that is Obama's original justification. Obama Deputy National Secretary Advisor Ben Rhodes later said that it was bin Salman's mentor, bin Salman, the Deputy Defense Minister of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates' Mohammed bin Zayed, who first came seeking to sell the war to them. So this is how the Obama administration was pulled in and chose to greenlight the Saudi response to Yemen. Also, one more thing. When it comes to the motives behind a conflict like this, you'll be not surprised at all to find out it's both parties. Donald Trump, November 20th, 2018, statement from President Donald J. Trump on standing with Saudi Arabia. Trump said, of the $450 billion, $110 billion will be spent on the purchase of military equipment from Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and many other great U.S. defense contractors. So this is explicitly a war for the military-industrial complex to sell weapons to the Saudis, even though they are in a mass murder campaign in Yemen. Anything on that?
Yeah, so how much of it is explicitly for the military-industrial complex, and how much of it is because of our agreement in the 70s with the Saudis that if they priced oil in dollars, we would give them certain protections? Does this extend beyond the certain protections we offered to give them? Is this being extra generous and going up, over the top, or does this fit into that agreement from the 70s, do you think?
Well, certainly having those commitments, those do have after effects, but usually they're just justifications that can be used at any time. So if I make 50 laws, it's better that I make 200 laws, because then at any point it increases the likelihood I could find a justification I want. This is like British Parliament in the First World War looking for a justification to wage war on Germany. And they found in 1839 that if Belgium independence is violated, they can declare war on that nation. So, I mean, decades and decades later, they're able to find something that didn't apply to the current ruling class and could have been solved more peacefully. Governments are constantly looking for this justification, but certainly that incentive would fit. I don't know the details, of course. At any time that something can only be purchased in your currency gives you a ton of leverage. That's why the potential ruble only declaration from Putin is really difficult, and it is shooting ourselves in the foot the more we sanction and vilify mostly innocent Russians and Putin as well.
Yeah. So the other thing is, you were mentioning how this has been a bipartisan effort. Biden has been the most reserved out of the last three presidents, Trump, Obama, and Biden. He's been the most reserved, and while he was running, he campaigned on ending support for this effort that the Saudis have been doing in Yemen. Of course, when he got in, he didn't actually end any support, but they've been angry. The Saudis have been angry at Biden just for the language he's used surrounding this issue, even though he hasn't done anything to actually end it. So, like, what's with that? Like, I mean, has he actually done anything to end it? Am I wrong in saying that he really hasn't made any moves? It's just all been it's all been talk, or has he actually tried to do anything?
There's been nothing significant, but we did get some good news recently, which I'll go over soon here. No, he had originally said this in an article published by Joe Biden. I mean, to even say, I'm sorry, authored by Joe Biden, to just see his name as the author is just hilarious. I mean, heaven knows who wrote this thing. But yes, in that, I was surprised to see that he said we need to stop sending weapons to the Saudis because of their crimes in Yemen. So that was just so shocking. It's like, wow, he really is pulling back on this thing. Maybe they think, you know what, we've gotten away with murder literally for years and years just in this theater alone. We better call our shots. We better call this tab before we totally bankrupt ourselves as far as international recognition goes. I mean, because how many? What if there were like 20 mainstream stories at once about this, or 20 journalists? It would just crash. It would, to the same extent that Biden originally had this mask mandate for his first 100 days, but saw that he had no public support, so he just ditched it. If people saw the extent to which, how ridiculous of a war of choice this is, and the levels of destruction, it would delegitimize this regime in ways that are just monumental. In the same way, LBJ had a lot of difficulty responding when people saw footage of what was actually happening in Vietnam, and war wasn't just some vague, foggy thing happening 1,000 miles away. So, yeah, it's very dangerous if enough people appreciate the depravity of this.
Yeah, so when Trump was still president, I find this so ironic because he's hailed as some anti-war president. But when I think Bernie Sanders led the resolution in the Senate to end the war in Yemen, and it passed, and then he vetoed it.
That's right. Yeah,
that was quite a moment because it seemed like we actually had some public will to end this thing, and then Trump overrode it and kept it going.
Yeah, just unreal. Now, one more thing as far as whether this is just happening and the U.S. isn't stopping it, or whether there is actual participation. We got one more piece of information in favor of this is a U.S.-Saudi coalition as opposed to just something that the Saudis are to blame for. So this is from Enough Already by Scott Horton. He says, in place of a declaration of war by the elected Congress of the world's oldest constitutional republic, on March 25th, 2015, National Security Council spokeswoman Bernadette Mahine released a written statement in support of GCC. This is the Gulf Cooperation Council. Actions to defend against Houthi violence. President Obama has authorized the provision of logistical and intelligence support to GCC-led military operations. While U.S. forces are not taking direct military action in Yemen, in support of this effort, we are establishing a JPC, a Joint Planning Cell, with Saudi Arabia to coordinate U.S. military and intelligence support. So, I mean, it's so clear that this was totally greenlit by the world's superpower. Now, when they say logistics and intelligence support, that's so vague. Of course, as you know, they could turn any legislation into any justification. You just got to find the right judge to do so. If you remember, Donald Trump is giving a State of the Union speech, and he said, this is one of my guests. This woman unfortunately lost her husband in a very productive intelligence gathering that we were doing in Yemen, this fallen soldier, and everyone stands up and claps. And I think, Van Jones said at that moment he became president. And I'm sitting with a guy who looks at me and goes, "We're in Yemen?" And I look at him and I said, "We're in Arizona, they're in Yemen." Because I just can't appreciate that the state is the people. The point is that he said this, and so few people knew that there were operations going on in Yemen, let alone Syria, Libya, Somalia, fighting Jabhat al-Nusra aligning with Jabhat al-Nusra in Syria, fighting al-Shabaab in Somalia, all of these terrible things. Now, it also matters who the co-conspirators are. It's not just the Saudis, but against this Houthi regime is AQAP, which at the beginning, that's why I mentioned Obama. His original justification for going in here is to fight al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, the people who we're told are responsible for 9/11. They want an Islamic caliphate more or less across the planet because they hate democracy so much. Two things to mention on this. This is another quote from Enough Already by Scott Horton. He quotes the New York Times, so it's him quoting the New York Times, from June 10th, 2015. In recent weeks, the al-Qaeda affiliate in Yemen has allied with armed tribes to fight Iranian-backed Houthi rebels, putting that alliance on the same side of the country's civil war as the United States and Saudi Arabia. New York Times. In Syria, al-Qaeda allied fighters are important members of a rebel coalition against President Bashar al-Assad that includes groups supported by the West. Barack Obama famously came out and said Gaddafi needs to go, and he went. He also came out and said Assad needs to go, and this heavily escalated things in Syria. Assad is still there. But here is an email from 2012 by Jake Sullivan. Jake Sullivan is the current Joe Biden National Security Advisor. You could find a lot of his speeches on the Council on Foreign Relations YouTube channel. He said in an email, see last item, AQ is on our side in Syria. Otherwise, things have basically turned out as expected. So what's happening is al-Qaeda is in an alliance with America in the Syrian war against Assad, also allied with them in Yemen against the Houthi regime that took over after Hadi, the one-man election guy, was not able to fight the Houthis, who he originally picked a war with. I mean, the level of cluster, you-know-what, is just so astounding in all of these conflicts. But the fact that they're allied with al-Qaeda, I mean, if you would have told someone this September 12th of 2001, they would have been so shocked that they wouldn't even know what you're saying. So this, it's so evil and it's so inexcusable. And all of the excuses of, well, sometimes they got to keep secrets from us. It's for the greater good. You have to explain why they constantly lie relentlessly. If it's so good, surely we could not only fund it voluntarily, but they could just tell us the truth about it. Hey, we're doing this really good thing. Don't you love us? So, anything on that? I think I got only a few more things. I don't mean to beat this dead horse, but heavens, it's just so incredible that they're getting away with this mass murder while I still hear about January 6th from Stephen Colbert to this day.
Well, what's amazing is, the big bad boogeymen in the U.S., the United States recent history has been the Nazis, the Soviets, and Islamic extremists, and we've armed all of them, to fight against each other. It's just kind of insane. And they just try to convince us that every time they arm somebody, they're moderate. So these are the moderate Nazis in Ukraine. They're the moderate rebels in Syria. The Saudis are actually better than the rest of these countries surrounding them. They're, I don't think any, the difference between trying to crack the idea of unconditional funding for Israel is a little harder because Israel, in a lot of ways, its culture is more westernized, where Saudi Arabia just isn't. I don't think any average American, if you ask them, what do you think about Saudi Arabia? Some of them might be like, well, we get oil from them, but I don't think anyone would think that they're a moral country or that their culture is moderate in any way. Would you agree with that? Do you think that they're not very popular to the average American?
Yeah, certainly not. I mean, they're a monarchy, and I'm told monarchy is just so terrible to the point where democracy is worth violently enforcing. So yeah, certainly a lot of people. But then again, look at the incentive. If the average person finds out a ton about Saudi Arabia and a ton about politics, they get a 1 in 100 million vote to determine who the president is. And whether you have a Democrat or Republican, they're still giving money to the Saudis, justifying the crimes of the Israelis. They're justifying the NSA spying apparatus. They're still bad on Social Security. They still engage in economic regulation. So you yourself would have to bear the opportunity cost of less time with family, less time doing things you love, less time at work, less time relaxing, and dedicate yourself to learning about all of this just so you could get a 1 in 100 million vote to determine who the president is. And most of them lie about what they run on. So it's almost not even worth it. That's why it's so important to recognize, yes, this is bad, and there's a solution called voluntarism and libertarianism. Because, I mean, it is Scott's first book is called Fool's Errand, talking about Afghanistan, which we also sell at the Libertarian Institute. But think of the fool's errand of getting so many people involved in something, having them bear a huge cost just so they can have a 1 in 100 million vote. That is actual utopianism, the thing they always criticize us for. They are the ultimate utopians if they believe that.
Yeah.
I only got a couple more things on this. So now, as far as the number of people killed and the terrible devastation this humanitarian crisis is causing, the Saudi and United Arab Emirates approach to this is to engage in, I guess you could call it civilian warfare, but one of the approaches is to make the civilians, which is good news in the sense that they realize that civilians have, the power of public opinion behind them, and they can stop recognizing a regime. They intentionally punish the civilians in hopes that the civilians will get so angry, so fed up with their regime that they then violently overthrow their regime. So conservatives who are terrified of getting called racist are telling people to take up guns and violently overthrow a government and get shot at. I mean, do you not understand how difficult this is? We're going to starve you until you violently overthrow your own government. It's absolutely absurd. But this was the same approach that America had to Iraq after the first Gulf War, when we had this
Do you
Saddam.
think the price was worth it? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, really. Well, that's what that's from. This is, UN Ambassador, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, who recently
just died.
Who died. It's got to be a heck of a party with David Rockefeller and Madeleine Albright. I'd love to join that. So that was the justification that what we're going to do is we're going to get these people to rise up against their government. Rise up. But if you enter the Capitol without a permission slip, you're the devil. Also, these people should start shooting at Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi and Assad. Just ridiculous. So this is their, at least, front that they put on. They say, well, we have to do these things to get the people to rise up against their government. So they murder people and enslave them so they could be as free as a country that makes you watch TV to see if the governor allows you to go outside without a suffocation device on. I got to move on from that, or else we're just going to be on it forever. So as far as the real world results of this, here is, again, I'm quoting from Enough Already. In 2019, Major General David C. Hill, Deputy Commander of CENTCOM, confirmed to the AFP that the U.S. was still helping the Saudis with targeting their air war. Aside from the war never being authorized, the coalition has been committing war crimes since the beginning. For years, the Saudis have deliberately bombed the country's infrastructure and other civilian targets, such as the electricity, water and sewage works, schools, hospitals, factories, bridges, farms, markets, car and truck dealerships, fishermen in their boats, weddings, funerals, civilian apartment buildings, refugee camps, and even near ancient homes that had been passed down for families for generations. In 2019, the United Nations finally increased their number. They had said there were 10,000 deaths, estimating that 233,000 had been killed, 100,000 in direct violence, the other 130,000 from deprivation caused by the war. 60% of the dead were children under the age of 5. The group Save the Children counted 85,000 dead children in this deliberately inflicted famine back in the fall of 2018. In October 2020, the UN warned another 100,000 children were at risk of dying due to malnutrition. This is from the blockade. So just as Churchill's blockade of Germany in the First World War, when he was Lord of the Admiralty, you basically are starving a nation to death. It's going outside of someone's house with a gun and saying, you can plant all the food you want in your own backyard, but if you try to go to the store or trade with anyone else, I'm going to kill you. That is what you could call foreign regulation of people's economy. It's all this regulation for everyone's greater good when it comes to economic violence for something like this. So I'm using the numbers from the Council on Foreign Relations because usually if they can admit something, they have gone to the extent of, putting it in a favorable light. This was updated April 15th, 2022. Estimated number of people in need of humanitarian assistance, 20.7 million. Estimated number of people killed since 2015, 111,000. Estimated number of internally displaced persons, 4.2 million. I mean, imagine paying off your house, getting a house, and your house blowing up and all your belongings. I mean, as evil as taxation is for taking 30% of your money, imagine your house just getting totally blown up. And then people telling you that without government, there would be chaos. And governments are explicitly engaged in these horrific crimes. So that is just a
how accurate do you think those numbers are? Because that's what I was going to ask you before you said, CFR numbers, they're going to be conservative. So if you had to guess, like any idea of like how close to the mark that is, or
I would say that's close because there's been a lot of pressure since 2018 for them to more or less start calling the shots accurately, because they know if their numbers are so off, if the UN is still saying 10,000 after, years of there being airstrikes against civilians, they know that that's just not going to fly. So incentives really matter when it comes to reporting. Like if O.J. Simpson came out and said, I'm innocent and never killed anyone, that would not be news. No one would really care. But if OJ came out and said, you know what, I did kill my wife and the waiter, Ron Goldman, well, that would be breaking news. And a lot of people would say, look, that's proof. So the same source can be.
Oh, shit. Hold on. We lost you, Keith. We'll get Keith right back on. All right, there we go. We're back. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened, but
okay. So yes, the OJ example is just important because yes, sometimes the New York Times and CNN can be reliable. You know where their incentives lie, and you know if they, who have every incentive to report the opposite, are reporting it, they're probably doing it as a result of competition pressure. That look, we got to admit this. We can spin it 50 other ways, but in this case, we're going to say something or other that's not exactly always in our favor. That's why incentives matter when it comes to reporting. So, yeah, I think those CFR statistics are probably the closest that will come. Now, as of April 3rd, 2022, this is The Guardian. Yemen, 2-month ceasefire begins with hopes for peace talks. Also, the blockade has more or less ended and ships are now allowed to come into Yemeni ports and they're able to engage in exchange. UN Special Envoy Hans Grunberg stresses importance of building on truce in effort to end 6-year war. A UN-brokered 2-month ceasefire in Yemen was broadly holding on its first full day, with oil shipments reaching the ports of Yemen, including some ships that have been barred from entering for 88 days. Here is the special envoy, Hans Grunberg. The aim of this truce is to give Yemenis a necessary break from violence, relief from the humanitarian suffering, and most importantly, hope that an end to this conflict is possible. The terms of the truce include facilitating the entry of 18 fuel ships into the ports of Hodeida, Hodeida, and allowing 2 commercial flights a week to and from Sanaa's airport, Sanaa's the capital of Yemen, to predetermined destinations. So it's not a total ANCAP victory, but it's a move in the right direction. The terms also include convening a meeting between the parties to agree on opening roads in the city of Taiz, T-A-I-Z, and elsewhere to improve civilians' freedom of movement inside Yemen. So we got 2 months of a ceasefire, potential peace talks. That is the latest. And did I say the date on that? April 3rd, 2022. So yeah, that's where things are standing now.
So does this give us any type of reconsideration to think if we're going to keep supporting this now that, it seems like the Saudis have had enough of us and Biden has gestured that he wants to end this without doing anything? Does this ceasefire give us an opportunity to finally stop supporting the Saudis in Yemen? Or what do you think this is going to yield? Just a 2-month ceasefire and then it's going to be over? Or what do you expect to happen?
I'm hoping it'll end. I think it'll just be so difficult to go back to things just because of their inability to have the victory of putting Hadi back on the throne. This is the guy who was installed with the one-man election after Saleh was assassinated and left, and then waged war with the Houthis. The fact that he is never getting back on. Oh, and by the way, an interesting follow-up. Saleh, the original guy who left, he allied with the Houthis to take back the capital. I certainly hope I had made that clear earlier, because this is quite difficult to reiterate with names that are hard to remember. He then tried to end this conflict by having a meeting with the Saudis in 2017. The Houthis found out about this and then killed him, and then took a picture and posted it online. You can find it. I think I just saw it the other day. I think it should be citation 71 on the Wikipedia page for Saleh, president of Yemen. You can actually click there and see this image. That's pretty crazy to think this guy had been president in some sort of another from 1978 until 2012, and then he allies with a group against his former vice president, tries to broker a peace deal with the Saudis, and the Houthis kill him. Just unbelievable. So as far as whether this will be successful, it's such a great opportunity for them to just pretend like this never happened.
Right.
Just because, you want to take your victory and leave. And victory in this case, since it's not going to be Hadi back on the throne, it has to be something like no one goes to jail for war crimes, and the only reason that would get enough public attention would be if Russia and China and Belarus come together and just start grilling America for its Yemen war to distract from Russian war crimes in Ukraine, while the Ukrainians distract from Ukrainian war crimes against the people in the Donbass area, the Russian separatists. So if there is just an agreement between other powers that this is going to get a lot of light, there's just so little reward to keep this thing going that what once they thought was going to be, just as Bill Kristol went on C-SPAN and confidently said, well, this war in Iraq is not going to be like Vietnam. This is a war that's going to last 2 months. They really want these things to be, we came, we saw, he died. That is what Hillary Clinton said about Gaddafi in Libya. And it's so important because that captures exactly what the situation of strength is supposed to do. It's supposed to increase legitimacy in the minds of the masses of this regime. Hey, when they want something, they get it done. That's the important thing. So yeah, this would be a perfect way to say, we didn't really do that, or our hand was kind of forced, or it was just because Iran, and Iran wants nukes and they're now backing all these terrorists, the Hezbollah, the Houthis, allegedly. So now would be a great time for them to more or less just placate them themselves and say that it was much to do about nothing, and the bad things that happened were just because Iran staged a coup through the Houthis. So I'm certainly hoping so. Now's a good time to walk away.
Yeah. So how likely do you think that is? Do you think the people are going to jump at it, or
75% likely?
okay,
Just
that's good.
because just because there's no major goal that they can rally support behind. If there was if there was some prize that they could have that would keep people's emotions going, then you'd be able to do it. But just like, I mean, Nixon coming in under Vietnam, you just got to find your opportunity to get out. You got to find enough of a distraction. You got to make a huge exit. And yeah, well, look at, I would not have thought that the Bagram Air Force base or that airport in Afghanistan would ever see U.S. troops leave. But sure enough, there is that that video of them exiting, and it was just unbelievable. And then you see Biden going through with making Ukraine a NATO member state in all but name. Trump is giving him javelins. It's in their constitution to join NATO. Biden and Lloyd Austin explicitly give arms to Ukraine after helping stage a coup in 2014 against Yanukovych. So it's very possible that, not because they're so nice, but they either don't want to lose public support, or they're doing it because they want to allocate their scarce ability to convince people to support things towards other areas.
So what is our next move to placate the Saudis? Because haven't we failed them on pretty much every front at this point? I mean, we've given them a lot of weapons, but none of their agenda really has played out well, right? I mean, it seems to have backfired at every turn. So what's the next thing we're going to do for them? Or do you think our alliance with them is shaky enough that it could end?
You know what? I would be so insecure about making a prediction that it would just be useless. I never would have guessed that they would jump into a conflict like the one they did in Yemen. I continue to be shocked by the ruling class. The only thing I'm not shocked is just how evil they can be and new ways they can come up with justifying it. Other than that, I don't know what leverage they're going to use to keep this alliance. They almost have to. If China is voting, neutral against Russia going into Ukraine, they're going to have to do something to keep the Saudi oil coming in and stay friendly with the UAE. I can't imagine if there's any African countries but I mean, gosh, Brazil. I heard they were even looking at trading with Venezuela to get more oil to compensate for cutoffs from Russia. And just a few years ago, they were contemplating overthrowing Maduro in Venezuela. I have no clue. For me to predict that would not be productive at all.
Right. Well, any other thoughts on Yemen? Anything else you wanted to say, or is that pretty much wrap it up?
That pretty much wraps it up. What I had said about the importance of the state being the health of war is the big takeaway, because of course all we're doing is playing whack-a-mole with ruling class lies if we don't get to the heart of this issue. It's like, all right, they're going into Serbia and Kosovo and Bosnia. All right, let's look into this. And then they move on to Afghanistan. And then we got to look into that. And then Iraq. And then they say Iran's developing nukes. And then they're going into Syria. We can't just keep following every single one of these. And then in the middle of it, they say a virus now requires lockdowns and you have to wash your hands and masks don't work. And then now they do work. I mean, they constantly are just playing these games with you. So it's virtually impossible to spend so much time to decipher the truth, because even when you get the truth, they're now on to something else. So until we start holding the politicians to the same standards we'd hold any other organization to, voluntary funding, thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, then we're just asking for for trouble in the future. And it just comes from changing public opinion. Just as it would be extremely difficult for one of us to start writing words on paper and getting people to violently enforce our edicts, because we don't have public support. The second people no longer recognize the legitimacy of some people having the right to rule others, or the statist double standard, you could call it, then this thing ends. And while it's not impossible for war, you stop the primary drive for people to go to war, the existence of a state that gives you legal justification and the alleged moral justification for no one else to hold them to the standard you would clearly hold anyone else to. So yeah, that's the main takeaway. If anyone wants more information on this, they could check out the Libertarian Institute. The search engine has a lot of material. You can enter Syria, Yemen. Check out our news roundup by gentlemen like Kyle Anzalone. We got tons of material there.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for coming on and talking about all this. And like I said, I've had a couple conversations with Keith in the past. You can go check out his YouTube channel, which is linked in the description, as well as his Twitter. Is there anywhere else you want people to follow you, or any interesting projects you got coming up?
Odyssey.com, most importantly. Yes. Just because I'm at... I guess that strikes actually get removed after 90 days on YouTube. But I had a video that was on private. It was a discussion with James Perloff on COVID and lockdowns and their effectiveness. And that was removed. The algorithm just took it down and gave me a strike. And then I had another strike for summarizing Phil Magnus's work on COVID from the American Institute for Economic Research. So yes, Odyssey.com, please.
All right. Well, thanks, Keith. We will certainly do this again. I enjoy your content, and thanks for coming on.
Peace, brother.